What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down everything you need to know about the new Two-Tailed Fox Catalyst. So intrinsically, this rocket has the perk Twin Tails, shoots 2 rockets, 1 void and 1 solar that can track onto the same target. And then it has the perk Play with Your Prey. The void rocket suppresses enemies, the solar rocket causes damage over time. And with Lightfall, it now also adds Scorch to targets, so this weapon can create ignitions. And now lastly, it got a new catalyst called Third Tail, adds an additional arc rocket to the second shot in a volley. The arc rocket jolts targets. So let us start at the top with the damage this rocket does at base. This is an extremely difficult weapon to test total damage on, but I slaved away all day to bring you accurate DPS numbers. Jolt damage is a very tough thing to measure, so there may be some inconsistency in a real world scenario, depending on how many targets are around the boss to deal jolt damage off of. But anyways, let us look at the damage numbers without the catalyst first as a baseline. Each rocket hits for 30,756 impact damage and 8,777 blast damage. This could be the other way around, but it doesn't really matter. Each rocket hits for 39,533 damage. We times that by 2 because there's 2 rockets for a total of 79,066 damage. But the Scorch damage also ticks a bunch for 7109 damage total. So the total damage of one shot is 86,175. So now let's look at the damage of the rocket with the catalyst applied. The original 2 rockets deal exactly the same damage, but the new third arc volley which applies jolt hits for 3 damage numbers, 7689, 13336, and 104. This equals 21,129. So the new total damage is 100,195 damage per shot. But that is not the whole story. Subsequent shots from the rocket will cause an ignition and a jolt. The jolt is hard to measure, like I said, because it needs enemies around to jolt off of, and it's also hard to measure because the means of applying jolt scales with damage. So because the rocket hits hard, therefore the jolt damage will be greater than something that doesn't hit as hard. I tried testing skip grenades on Carl to show the jolt damage, but the numbers were wildly different. So we're just going to go with the numbers I showed off in the clip. So let's say we only get 1 jolt per shot. The total damage will be 100,195 like I mentioned, but the follow-up shot will push us over 100 Scorch stacks, meaning we will hit for 32,739 ignition damage. So in a team setting, ignitions will be going off like crazy. But let's just talk about solo DPS here. So due to the ignition, the second shot would deal 132,934 damage. So for ease of calculation, let's just divide the ignition damage in half and call it each shot is 116,561 damage. That is the average damage of 2 rocket shots of Two-Tailed Fox with the catalyst. We will get to some DPS numbers in a bit, but first let's compare this damage with a God Roll Hothead. A single shot of Hothead with Explosive Light, Impact Casing, and Adept Big Ones hits for a total damage of 119,591. So even with this great buff to the exotic, it is still barely outshined by a perfectly rolled Hothead. Plus, add the fact that one player could be running Wolfpack rounds on Galahorn, and basically, Two-Tailed Fox will not be the meta for damage. But for now, let me show you a couple other cool things about the Two-Tailed Fox. Void Weapon Surge works with both rockets, and it works with the ignitions. In the first clip, our ignition hit for 32,739, but with 3 Void Weapon Surges, it hits for 39,941. That is extremely interesting and not something I expected to see. It's very strange that Void Weapon Surge would buff ignition damage, but we'll take it. The buff to the ignition is 22%, so it is definitely the surge boost that's getting applied to the ignition. Next, this season on the artifact, we have a mod that gives volatile rounds for 14 seconds when you pick up an Orb of Power. And this also adds damage to the Two-Tailed Fox because it's void. And so with volatile rounds, on top of the catalyst, we almost delete Carl in 2 rockets. But with the Hothead, we hit for nearly identical damage after 2 rockets of Explosive Light with Arc Surge times 3. And then if we add Galley into the mix, our Hothead hits for 234,156 damage. We have 8 Wolfpack rounds, each hitting for 11,032 damage, so we add another 88,000 damage to our Hothead when we have a teammate running Galahorn. So in a raid team setting, if everyone had God Roll rockets, the Hothead with a Galley would definitely be your best bet. But in a 3-man setting, 3 Two-Tailed Foxes might be very strong. like on the Spire of the Watcher dungeon boss for instance. My clanmates and I took the boss to half damage and we didn't even have lunefactions on. If we did, we would have easily gotten below half. Plus, not everyone has a god roll rocket launcher, so this would be an easily obtainable rocket for a more casual player to pick up and use. A couple more things about Two-Tailed Fox before we get to DPS numbers. It can suppress and jolt, meaning we can stun overload champions, so this gives it some added utility. However, overload champions do like to blink around a lot, so it's not the most consistent for stunning them. And in something like Dares of Eternity with a ton of ads running around, the jolt damage actually works very well for ad clear as well. And secondly, it holds 8 rockets at base, where most rockets only hold 6. With 1 reserve we hold 9, and 2 reserves we can hold 10. Right now, certain mods in the game are bugged like Elemental Reload and Reserve mods, so you may not always have those mods working if you die and respawn and rally a flag. But just trust me when I say, when the mods are working right, you can have 10 total reserves on the rocket. And that's really good for total damage output. However, Two-Tailed Fox does feel like absolute shit to shoot, so I don't really like using it. So now, let's break down the DPS. For the God Roll Hothead, it takes 12.95 seconds to fire off 6 shots with a Lunafaction Rift, meaning the 6-shot DPS is 55,409. After 6 shots, you lose explosive light rockets, so your DPS will go down. But with how easy it is to get orbs these days, that may not be an issue for longer boss fights. And that is base DPS. If we add Weapon Surge, that DPS will go up to 67,598, and with Wolfpack rounds and Surge, we are looking at 108,489 DPS. And lastly, if we throw in a Well of Radiance for a 25% damage boost, we are hitting for 135,611 DPS. That is absurd. So now let's look at the DPS of Two-Tailed Fox. It takes 15.333 seconds to shoot off all 6 rockets. I'll break down the numbers of all the damage that Two-Tailed Fox does, so you can see it all individually. So basically, the base DPS of the Two-Tailed Fox, if running solo accounting for an ignition on every second shot, is 51,483. This could be generous because it is very hard to account for volatile rounds in this equation, and then if we add Weapon Surge, that takes it to 62,809 DPS. And with a Well of Radiance, that would be 78,512 DPS, so not nearly as good as the Hothead. And finally, because I am sure someone will ask, let's look at the DPS of a Clown Cartridge rocket. Again, I have the God Roll with Impact Casing and I'm running Adept Big One spec. At base, it hits for 95,812 damage and it fires off 6 rockets in only 8.717 seconds, assuming you have 2 in the mag to start. This is a base DPS of 65,948, which is 10,500 more DPS than the Explosive Light Roll. The rest of the DPS numbers are on screen now. One interesting thing to note is with the Galley rockets, your Wolfpack rounds also do 22% more damage if you are using 3 Arc Surge mods, so it buffs the rockets and your Wolfpack rounds. However, with the Clown Cartridge roll, you will be out of reserves very quickly, and then you will likely need something else to deal damage to the boss. So something like the Izanagi swap with an auto-loading holster explosive light rocket launcher is still probably going to be king, especially for long damage phases. But if it's a quick like 10-second burst DPS phase, then the Clown Cartridge is definitely what you want to go with, as it is the highest DPS, but definitely not the highest total damage output. And that is it for the video. I hope it was helpful. It took me literally all day to test this stuff because I had to test out so many different scenarios and things to get accurate numbers, so a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. The TLDR on this is that Two-Tailed Fox is definitely not a meta DPS option for raids when you can have a team of Wolfpack boosted rockets dealing DPS instead. Now, if you made it this far, then I thank you so much for watching. Happy Lightfall grinding Guardians, and take care.